Hey guys, and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be talking about Star Wars canon. That seems to be a very heavily debated topic in the community today, so I'd really like to dive into it and talk about what it is, what it should be, and should it exist in the first place. So to specify even further, I would like to talk about headcanon, the two canons that I believe exist, as well as talk about how I interpret the current Disney canon and the pathway that I think it should take. So let's start with headcanon because I think that's likely the easiest topic to talk about and the one that most of us will agree on despite what our Star Wars takes might be. I think that it is perfectly acceptable to headcanon whatever you want. It could be just the originals and prequels, it could be just the originals and sequels, it could be anything that happens within Anakin Vader's storyline, so episodes 1 through 6 and anything else in between then. It could be the EU stuff, everything that came before Disney, or it could just be one individual movie like The Empire Strikes Back and nothing else. I think whatever you want the story to be is what it should be. Anyone telling you that you have to follow a certain storyline, be it the EU, be it Disney Star Wars, is gatekeeping. They don't tell you what you get to be a fan of. If you like even one thing from Star Wars, even if it's just the Clone Wars cartoon, then you are a Star Wars fan and you can just enjoy that. It is up to you to decide what you want to be part of your story. Something that you enjoy and might see as part of your Star Wars story and your Star Wars experience might not be part of the canon that Disney and Lucasfilm puts out and says is canon, but that shouldn't matter. There is so much great Star Wars content out there that isn't canon. It's honestly kind of a shame that some people don't go out and experience some of these pieces of content or can't enjoy them strictly based off of the fact that they're not canon. I mean, the Thrawn trilogy, the Darth Bane books, the Darth Plagueis book, the Knights of the Old Republic video games, the 2003 Clone Wars micro series, all of those are absolutely fantastic, and absolutely none of that is currently canon. Now, for those of you who know me, I'm not the biggest sequel trilogy fan. I did like The Force Awakens a lot, but The Last Jedi absolutely wasn't for me, and The Rise of Skywalker was a pretty big disappointment as well. So personally, I don't see the sequel trilogy in my headcanon. Instead, I replace that with the Thrawn trilogy, and pretty much everything else in Star Wars, if it doesn't contradict a significant piece of Star Wars, is in my headcanon. I like to pretend that the Knights of the Old Republic stuff came before the actual Skywalker saga. I like to pretend even that both Clone Wars cartoons are canon. And it's not just George Lucas and EU stuff that I see in my canon. There's a lot of Disney stuff that I love too. I absolutely love Star Wars Rebels. I absolutely love Rogue One. And some of the other stuff I'm not huge on, like The Mandalorian, I'm not huge on just yet. Solo was just kind of average for me, but like I don't have a problem with that existing in my headcanon, so all of that is fine. So I cherry pick personally from George Lucas Star Wars, from the EU, and from Disney to create my own personal storyline. Now, you don't have to do that. You can follow just what Disney and Lucasfilm says is canon for Star Wars. You can follow just the old EU stuff, so what was canon before Disney wound up taking over. It is whatever you want it to be, and don't let anybody tell you what your Star Wars story should look like just because it doesn't quite fit with their opinion. I had somebody recently upset that I said that the sequels weren't in my personal headcanon because they liked the sequels. They, on the other hand, did not like the prequels, and knowing that I do, primarily just Revenge of the Sith, but I appreciate the other two and absolutely acknowledge them as part of the story, they said, well, should I just be able to say that the prequels don't exist in my headcanon? Yes. If you don't like the prequels, then you don't have to pretend that they exist. I do. I have a deep appreciation for them as well as George Lucas, so they're absolutely in my story, but if you do not like them, you don't have to pretend they exist. It's that simple. And to drive this point home even further, Matt Martin, who is a creative executive and on the Lucasfilm storyboard, even went to Twitter to say this: "There is a reason that we need to internally know what is and isn't canon so we can keep our line of official storytelling as aligned as possible, but that doesn't mean fans can't individually pick and choose what they want to accept as true." So this is about as high up as we're going to hear it from. Fans can decide what stories they want to exist and which ones they want to pretend don't. And the reason he gave for why Disney and Lucasfilm need to keep one official storyline as canon makes perfect sense. They need it so that they can have consistency within their own storytelling, so that there's no contradictions, there's no leaps and things that don't make sense. So I perfectly understand there, although I will say after hearing that does beg the question for, is there a possibility for multiple timelines? But that's something we can get into later down the line. So the next thing that I would like to talk about are the two canons that I believe exist. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people freaking out and saying, two canons? What are you talking about? There's Disney Star Wars canon and that's it because they own Star Wars. I disagree. Now, I'm sure that most of you are assuming that I'm referring to the EU as the other Star Wars canon outside of what Disney says is canon, so everything that came before Disney. But that's actually not what I'm referring to. I'm talking about George Lucas Star Wars. Now, there's a fundamental reason that I believe this, and there's also a small clip from an interview with Dave Filoni that completely conveys what I'm getting at, which I will play for you in a second. But the fundamental reason that I believe that George Lucas canon exists is because he's the creator. His stories are his stories, and they can stand on their own without anything else attached to them. And what he created were the originals, the prequels, and the 2008 Clone Wars cartoon series. Every other piece of Star Wars content that exists, well, much of it was approved by him going back to the EU days. He definitely oversaw everything. That wasn't part of his story, and that is part of what Dave Filoni says in this interview I'm about to show you. But to help you understand what I'm getting at even better, because I know it's a little bit confusing because Star Wars is in unprecedented territory. The only other sort of blockbuster movies that come close are superhero films, and we've had so many different Batmen and so many different Spider-Men that it definitely is a much different scenario than Star Wars. But let me compare this to The Lord of the Rings. The creator of those books and the Hobbit books, J.R.R. Tolkien, created those books, and that was it. That was all that was a part of his universe. He has been deceased for many years now, unfortunately, and Amazon actually owns the Lord of the Rings IP. And they're actually now planning on creating a live-action TV series set in the Lord of the Rings universe, and that's outside of the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films that were already adapted by Peter Jackson not too long ago. But just because Amazon owns the IP of the Lord of the Rings, and this live-action series will now be part of the Lord of the Rings story, that doesn't mean that it's part of J.R.R. Tolkien's story. So that's why I believe that there are two Star Wars canons. There is the canon that is everything that the creator of Star Wars created, George Lucas, which again are his 6 films and the Clone Wars cartoon series. And then there is what Disney and Lucasfilm say is currently canon, which are all of those things I just mentioned, as well as the sequels, Solo, Rebels, and some other things as well. I would just like to reiterate, however, that I don't follow either of those two canons specifically. I cherry pick from George Lucas, from Disney, and from the EU. I see the Skywalker saga that George created, his 6 films, but not the sequels. However, there's lots of stuff from Disney that I throw in, such as Rogue One, such as Rebels, and there's a lot of stuff from the EU that I consider part of my canon as well, such as the Thrawn trilogy and such as Knights of the Old Republic. So to anybody who thinks that I have a personal stake in this and that I believe George Lucas canon exists simply because I want it to, that is absolutely not the case, because then I'd be missing out on so much other great stuff that I love. I just believe that those are the two technical canons that exist outside of whatever somebody would like to headcanon. Now, I'm going to play a clip from that interview with Dave Filoni that I've been talking to you guys about, which it has upset some EU fans in the past, and I will elaborate on that afterwards. But this can also be applied to Disney Star Wars fans as well, and I will explain that afterwards as well. But here, let's take a listen to this.
It's a funny thing, having been here a while and actually telling Star Wars stories. I'm in a very odd, unique position, which is that there's this notion that everything changed and when everything became legends, and I can see why people think that. But having worked with George, I can tell you that it was always very clear, and he made it very clear, that the films and the TV shows were the only thing that he considered canon. That was it. Mm-hmm. So everything else was a world of fun ideas, exciting characters, great possibilities, but the EU was created to explore all those things. And I know, and I fully respect people's opinion about it, that some of the material said the next canon part of it, okay, but from the filmmaking world that I was brought into, the TV series, the films were it. Mm-hmm. They were set in stone.
So I'm sure you can see how that might upset some EU fans. Dave essentially saying that even George says that those EU stories were never part of his canon. But I think that there's some fine print in there that some people aren't reading. Once this whole debate about what is canon sparked up, there was an EU writer who came out and said that during the writing of those books and comics and things when George still owned Star Wars, they were under the impression that those stories were canon when they were creating them. So the way I interpret Dave's comments are that George's story is George's story, his 6 films and his television series. Back when the EU was still going on, those were part of the overall canon, but again, George's story is his own thing and he sort of can dictate what he wants it to be. If he wound up making sequels instead of Disney, he could have wiped the Thrawn trilogy from that canon and just made his own sequels. George certainly understood the importance of storytelling, and he knew what those EU stories meant to so many Star Wars fans out there. They were a way to explore other areas in the galaxy in new stories and different times outside of just what he had created. And like I said earlier, he oversaw the creation and development of those EU stories, even though he may not have been actively writing and creating them himself. While George hasn't really had a role in Star Wars since Disney bought it from him, I do think that he sees Disney and the EU in similar lights. They are just different ways of adding on to and contributing to the universe that he created. His story will always be the 6 films and the Clone Wars, and Disney buying Star Wars from George is what wiped the EU from canon, as everybody knows. And while the EU was canon at the time when George owned Star Wars, it was still never part of his own story that he created, if that makes sense. Now, to apply this to Disney Star Wars, there were a lot of Disney Star Wars fans who were really happy when they heard those comments by Dave Filoni and were using it as a way to rub it in the faces of EU fans simply for not liking Disney Star Wars. But that could apply to Disney Star Wars as well in the manner in which I was trying to explain it earlier and why I think George Lucas canon exists. If George believes that the only thing that is part of his story and his canon is what he created, then that should still apply, meaning that there is 2 canons, Disney Star Wars and George Lucas Star Wars. Now, the last thing that I would like to talk about is how I interpret the current canon, what I think will happen with it, and sort of what I wish would happen with it. Despite the fact that I don't see the sequel trilogy in my headcanon, and personally I do wish that they would be decanonized, that's never going to happen. The sequel trilogy films were 3 super high budget blockbuster films that brought back a lot of old actors like Harrison Ford, who has been asking to be killed off since The Empire Strikes Back. And Carrie Fisher, of course, is unfortunately deceased now, so I don't think that they would want to disrespect her legacy. So whether it should happen lore-wise or not, and whether they disrespected these characters or stories that we've loved for so many years or not, I think that decanonizing these films or remaking them is completely off the table, unfortunately. If you do enjoy those movies and you found them satisfactory, then I am totally happy for you and honestly really envious because I wanted to love them so bad. I don't like disliking Star Wars. It's not fun for me. It seems like there may be a lot of people out there who want to dislike these films. Not me. I want Star Wars to be great. But despite the fact that I just said that I don't think the sequels will ever be decanonized or be remade, at least in live action, I will propose the idea, what if canon was redefined? What I mean by this, I'm not entirely sure. I only have a general idea, so Disney and Lucasfilm would definitely have to shape the bulk of this idea, but essentially what I'm proposing is that there shouldn't be just one canon, that there should be 2 or more, or 0. I know earlier in the video I read a tweet from a Lucasfilm storyboard member, Matt Martin, where he said that they need to have this one canon so that they can have consistency with their storytelling. And while that makes sense, I feel like fans in general would be much happier if they had the freedom to choose what was canon, but didn't just have to say, this is in my head canon. For some reason, for a lot of people, that label of canon means everything. It gives things legitimacy. And so like I said earlier, there are people who can't enjoy non-canon stuff, or they're absolutely heartbroken that this new sequel trilogy and other Disney stuff is part of the canon. So it's just very odd how much they put this term canon on a pedestal. So if you open that up and redefine the term and what it can mean, I think that it would make fans a lot happier. Like I said, I don't have a real good idea for what these different versions of canon could look like, but just to spitball a few ideas, perhaps they could recanonize all of the old EU stuff and just have that be a separate canon, so both EU and the Disney stuff are canon, and you just get to pick which one you want to follow. And maybe to give the recanonization of the EU a little bit more legitimacy, perhaps they could adapt some of that stuff. I'm sure if they made an animated trilogy of the Thrawn books, a ton of fans would absolutely love to see that. And outside of the Clone Wars movie that was really just the first 4 episodes of the show crammed into a movie, we haven't seen an animated Star Wars movie before, so I think that's an avenue that they should really consider exploring. And the Thrawn books, they're so beloved by so many people, but they're never going to bring those stories into canon unless they redefine canon. Like I said, they're not going to decanonize the sequels. So instead of taking things away, they should look at expanding the storytelling. At least that's my opinion. I think doing the EU Disney thing is the most obvious choice for the 2 canons and the best way for Disney to profit off of it. But I would say that things would get kind of conflicting for me because, like I've said, I absolutely love Star Wars Rebels and I absolutely love Rogue One. But if they did it that way, Rogue One and Rebels wouldn't be part of the EU canon. So I would still be stuck headcanoning things from there. But at least maybe we would get an animated Thrawn trilogy, so that would be cool. And I'm sure there would be lots of people happy that there is a different storyline recanonized. But either way, I just really believe that the term canon is too strict and too limiting, and that we should really look to expand our definition of what that means on all fronts. But thank you guys so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. This is something that I've wanted to talk about for a long time, but there's a lot to say, so it wasn't just something that I could put out in a Twitter thread. I needed to make a video. But let me know what you guys think of the topics we've discussed here today down in the comments below. This is meant to be an open discussion, so I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. But again, thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.